Denton is an Australian Gold Logie nominated television presenter and former radio host. Amongst the many, many things that Andrew has done, he was the host of the ABC's brilliant interview program and my favourite show ever, Enough Rope. So no pressure for me today. Andrew founded Go Gentle Australia in 2016. Go Gentle is a charity which promotes end-of-life choices, including the option of voluntary assisted dying. Go Gentle was instrumental in passing voluntary assisted dying laws in all 6 states. Jane Morris is also with us. Jane is the president of Dying with Dignity Victoria. She started her career as a nurse and then as a mature age student completed a Master's of Bioethics and studied the topic of VAD with avid interest. Jane is a member of our community. Her mother died of MND 10 years ago. Jane's mother's death was a catalyst that spurred her into action to take on the role of a staunch, vocal and active advocate for Victorian VAD legislation. I understand that today may be very difficult to listen to, but I think it's really important that we are as educated as possible and are aware of the choices that we have for our own life. I am super excited, but I have been exceptionally nervous for the last week because Andrew Denton's with us today. And as someone called him, he's the interviewer's interviewer. And I grew up watching Andrew, so I'm a little bit of a fangirl. And Jane Morris. So, Jay, I've introduced them before, but I'm just going to say hi and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. So I just wanted to say that when we have MND or a carer for a person with MND, we know that death is the only outcome. There's no hope for us. So one of the things that we learned very quickly is that we have to be an advocate for ourselves. And throughout the MND journey, we learn to advocate through all of the medical system, and more often than not, we have to advocate until our very last breath. And this is happening constantly. We need, as a community, to be educated about end of life and our options about end of life. And often, very often, when we're diagnosed with MND, we don't realise that that's an option in this day and age, which still is quite incredible. So that's why I want you guys here today. We want to talk about freedom of choice. We want to talk about the VAD, the voluntary assisted dying. So Andrew Denton first, and Jane Morris. So we're going to call Jane Jane too, because I'm Jane 1 and I was here first, and we know me better than this one so far. Yes, Jane. We know Andrew calls me Jane 7. I want to find about his James 2 to 6 later on. I want to thank you both so much for being here. Okay, what we like to do on this podcast, as you've both probably heard, is to find out a little bit about who you are, not what you do, because this is a community. So, Andrew, kick off with you. Who's Andrew Denton?
I'm Taurus. I like to walk on beaches and drink pina coladas. That's full disclosure right there.
I love that. Totally.
I'm a former media personality, now in remission. And what I actually am these days is the founding director of Go Gentle Australia, which is a charity set up to advocate for better end-of-life choices, and in particular to promote the legalisation of voluntary assisted dying around Australia, which for many years was illegal and fiercely opposed by all manner of organisations, powerful and influential, and many medical.
Yeah, I'll get onto that in a little bit. Jane, who the heck are you?
Thank you, Jane. I am a mother of 2, a wife, a grandmother of 3 now, which is very, very demanding, but I absolutely love it. And I'm also just a passionate advocate of VAD. I saw my mother die an horrendous death. As a nurse, I saw people dying in the most inhumane circumstances. And I am so enthusiastic for this cause, over-enthusiastic. I jump into things and take on too much, but I'm loving it and just loving all the people I meet through my work as president of Dying with Dignity Victoria.
Andrew, at any point of time that you feel the need to overtake this conversation / interview, I give you permission.
Well, that's very kind, Jane 1, and I noticed Jane 7 put up her hand then. No, I feel no need whatsoever. And just to add a slightly more human touch, I'm the father of 1, married to Jennifer for 35 years, and Like Jane, very passionate about this cause. It's completely changed the direction of both our lives, and in a really positive way.
So for those of you who don't know, I lost a son when he was 21 to cancer, and then my husband to motor neuron disease 3 years ago. My son died in 2010, and that was not a nice death. And my husband in 2021 died quickly, but that also wasn't a very nice death. So this is something that I've been passionate about for as long as you two. I've been watching on the sidelines and cheering you on. I know that in Melbourne in 2025, people are still having deaths that are absolutely and totally unacceptable. I get a little bit passionate about that, so it's something we'd like to discuss. Andrew, I'm not going to go into your dad's passing, but I just want to say that your dad Kit passed an awful death, an horrendous death, and that was a catalyst for you quite a few years later to do something about this. And Jane, your mother had MND, another member of our community, and then your father also had an horrific death. So therefore, that's the catalyst for you.
Yeah.
Andrew, Go Gentle is an extremely impressive organisation. How you have the passion, the energy, and I think audacity probably helps to get the laws passed that you did. We have as voluntary assisted dying laws in every state in this country. Canberra are going to come on, it's a territory, is coming on board at the end of the year. Is that right?
Correct.
Why are they so slow? Why can't they catch up with the rest of us?
Well, for a long time, they were prohibited. So we are a democracy in Australia, but sometimes extraordinary things happen. So back in 1995, the Northern Territory was the first place in the world to pass an assisted dying law. But because it was a territory, the Commonwealth laws enabled the federal parliament to not just overrule that law, but to actually ban all Australian territories, including the ACT, from even debating it in their parliament. And that was only overturned in the federal parliament a couple of years ago. That's why it's taken them so long.
I remember listening to Andrew Olley one afternoon, that afternoon in 1995, when it was passed in the Northern Territory, and the excitement and people ringing him and talking to him about it. I can remember sitting on the kitchen floor crying. I was so happy. And then it was overturned like that. I prefer not to swear. But that was a kick in the guts for everybody, yeah?
It was. And, last year we passed the marking of former federal minister, Liberal Minister Kevin Andrews, who was responsible primarily for that law being overturned. It was a private member's bill, very unusual for those to pass into law. And it says something about the priorities still and power within this country. That Kevin Andrews, a journeyman minister who did nothing particularly exceptional in his career, except on a negative way, got both a state funeral and an Order of Australia medal. And you tell me the last time, an unexceptional federal minister got a state funeral. So it tells you something about the power that still resides in this country, that resides in our church and in our faith-based politics.
Jane, comment.
Oh, yes. Look, absolutely agree. It was horrendous. Only 4 people managed to access a voluntary assisted death in the Northern Territory, one being Bob Dent, who was the first, and his wife Judy has kept on with the organisation in the Northern Territory. I think sometimes she's had AGMs where there's 4 people. The Northern Territory is going to be a very, very difficult place to get legislation because, of course, the Indigenous communities and I think all the opponents are going to do, a head-on attack. They'll all go there and try and get to the Indigenous community. So it's going to be a really, really hard slog to get that across, but we are trying, and there's some little steps in the right direction going on at the moment.
I often wonder if the people who oppose voluntary assisted dying have never themselves been in the position to watch their person suffer.
Well, actually, sorry, Jane, it's worse than that. That is the case, just as some people that support it have never actually witnessed that either. The worst case, and Jane certainly knows about this, and I have many testimonies, are those who do know. They know really well. They're doctors. Sometimes they're palliative care doctors, often, but not always. They're in faith-based institutions, and they have not only seen, but sometimes been directly responsible for the care of people suffering in extremis at the end of life. And they were the ones who for years effectively petitioned our parliaments for these laws not to pass, often because of their moral view of the universe. It was a profound example of people putting their own personal beliefs ahead of the good of their patients and of the community at large and the community's wishes at large.
Can I just, say, I've always considered voluntary assisted dying to be a very forgiving type of legislation, because there are opponents who just go on and on with their criticism of it. And then the day comes when they are diagnosed with a terminal illness. They can suddenly see their own death and what's going to entail. And suddenly, very quietly, they switch. And oh yes, I am, an advocate of assisted dying now. What I love is when that's a public figure and they come out. And I think a major individual I'm thinking of is Archbishop Lord Carey over in England. And he was vehemently opposed to it. And he changed his mind after he got out of Parliament, but he came out and said, I was wrong. And we've had a few people in Australia, I think Campbell Newman was one, and they're the people I think, have a very, very persuasive argument for this cause.
Kind of sucked in a way, mate. So it's just like, when we start considering ourselves all in the same community and not separate divisions, life might get a little bit better. I also want to discuss, this isn't, the reason I have you here is not to discuss the ethics of VAD, because basically that's been done to death. Pun like that, Andrew. It was a good pun, wasn't it?
Very good.
I want this to be a conversation about the options that we have now when we've been diagnosed. And as I said before, people are still having bloody hideous deaths. And a lot of those reason that those deaths are awful, Andrew, is because some doctors at some point want to rush in at the end and be the hero and save the life of the person in the bed. And a very dear friend of mine that happened to recently, not reading the notes, not understanding their requirements at the end of life. Now, that wasn't VAD, but still they had specific outcomes that they wanted, and it was a miserable death. Someone else also said, and it may have been Andrew Denton, don't go into an interview without knowing the outcome, what you want to know from this interview. So what I want to know is, how can we change the perception of the medical fraternity to understand that this is something that is really, really, really necessary for many people, especially people with MND. Now, this will be difficult for many in the MND community to listen to today, because you're dying, but we want to make that better for you. How do we get past the egos of a lot of the medical fraternity? Number one.
Well, I'll start if that's all right, Jane. I think yes, there are egos and there are morals, but a lot of it's training. I think that's where it has to start. I see this as being a generational question. If you're trained as health professionals currently are, particularly specialists, to be the doctor's hero and to treat every possible treatment and to take every possible path, then the idea of voluntary assisted dying is seen as a defeat, a failure. So I think it needs to change at the outset. But I would also say the question of people's choices, you highlighted that not many people still know about assisted dying. That's a real question, but it's more complicated than the medical profession. And as I'm sure you both know in spades, it's also the families.
Yeah.
The dynamics within families when death and serious illness becomes a reality can be hypercharged. The fault lines in families can widen. And so there's many ways in which people who are at the end of their lives can be obstructed from the choice they would like, or have that choice obscured or smudged. And so, yes, it's a medical profession question, absolutely, but it's a question of wider education and conversation. And as Jane said, it's about it's a generous, it's voluntary assisted dying is a generous and caring philosophy, but that should apply to all choices at the end of life, be it palliative care, be it advanced care directives. But it's not an easy conversation for many families to have, and most of us don't get to it until suddenly it's upon us.
Yeah, because Robert, my husband, and I had to have many conversations about our son's impending death. So in a way, we were in training for his death, which on one side is a blessing, but on the other side is a total shit show, you know, that one family would have to go through that. But it's happening all around us every day. It's life. But I think also, going on from what you were saying, Andrew, is that our community, we tend to shy away from death as a conversation. Death still is to be hidden. I mean, we die and we get put into a coffin and we go away somewhere. Still in the UK, and I know in New Zealand, that you come home, you're laid out. People can come and visit you and come and see you. But in Australia, we're still quite scared of it, I think.
So I do think what is really great is we've seen this new generation of end-of-life doulas.
Oh, yeah.
And they are really sort of breaking the ice there. They're encouraging people to spend time with their loved ones after death. They're telling them how important that time can be. I think they're doing a lot, and a lot of it's based on just the individual and the family, and they travel through the process with them. I think we are starting to talk about death a lot more, but it's taking a while. The other thing that I have noticed is, in the beginning, one of the major problems for us was palliative care. There was this huge Grand Canyon type thing where VAD and palliative care were just mutually exclusive. We're now seeing, as it should be, recognised, not completely, but a lot more by a lot of palliative care institutions, that it is complementary. And actually, one of the palliative care physicians who worked in Western Victoria was saying a lot of the new students who come to work with him are more aware and wanting to, embrace this idea of voluntary assisted dying and learn more. But it's going to be a very, very gradual shift.
And that's Jane's right, and it's probably been the most significant advance from both our organisation's point of view in terms of promoting the awareness and acceptance of voluntary assisted dying as the building of bridges with palliative care. But from our point of view, we never saw palliative care as in opposition to assisted dying, because the whole point of palliative care, which came, it came from a religious background, a woman called Dame Cicely Saunders and her philosophy. I mean, she revolutionized end-of-life care, and a lot of people owe her great thanks. Her philosophy was, palliative care is not curative. It's about people who are dying, and we're going to help you live as well as you can and die as who you are. Now, that's exactly what voluntary assisted dying is about. And I know that's very much what people living with MND is about. It's about, as things get taken away, the things that are important to you and that make you you have to be as closely guarded and looked after as possible.
Yeah. And Jane, can I just say, 10 years ago...
I said no, what would you do?
Oh, all right, I just zipped my lips. Okay. May I keep going, please? 10 years ago, my mum was diagnosed with MND, and very, very few people really knew what MND, they were Googling it and trying to find out. That week she was diagnosed, Neil Danaher came out with his diagnosis. And of course, we learnt all about every horrific fact on the front page of every paper. And it was wonderful. I mean, the attention he's brought to this illness has been incredible. But at the same time, we must remember that people are also being educated about the horrific symptoms and the horrific way you can die. Every time there's an article, you hear you're gradually paralysed, you'll stop talking, you'll stop eating, and finally you can't breathe. So we've got to keep that in mind, that when these people are diagnosed, people are a lot more aware of the type of death they will be, and I've got to say will be, because as you said, there is no hope of recovery. So it's very important at the time that we can say to those people, the doctor providing the diagnosis, yes, when they say, but I'm going to die like this, but to also say, but you do have the option of voluntary assisted dying. Because I know myself, if I got that diagnosis, it's that last stage which would just terrify me, absolutely terrify me. And it just would bring such comfort to know that I wouldn't have to go through that if I became eligible for VAD.
The key word there, though, Jane, is option. It's choice. Choice. That's what Jane and I, that's the banner under which we march, which is choice. And we're bringing out a book this year called The Power of Choice. A very brilliant photographer called Julian Kingma traveled around Australia for a year, photographing people and carers and doctors who were dealing with this choice. And one of the stories was a man with MND in Victoria. And he had the medication, the legal medication to end his life. But in the end, and he talked about how difficult it was to make that choice. In the end, he chose not to use it. In the end, he was palliated and sedated, and while they removed the support equipment for his breathing, and he died that way. So it really is about choice. It's about what is going to work for you. And we certainly, that's why we're both in this conversation, I'm sure. We're keen for people to understand voluntary assisted dying as a choice, but probably even more keen for people to realize they do have choices and that they should think about them.
And also it's the choice to, go down that path to access VAD, but then there's also that choice. Do you want to have your medication, as Andrew was saying? And a third of the people, once they get their medication, say, as one of our doctors said, I don't have to worry about the dying now. I can live life till I die. And that is just such a powerful statement, I think.
It's all about choice. And when you have MND, as you know, Jane, and Andrew, I'm sure you've met many people, you're powerless. You become powerless in everything except for your brain. So to be able to have that power, that last final decision over your life. Now, if you're approved for VAD, you may use it or you may not use it. But I speak every day with people who have MND, and they just say, at least I have that option if I need it. Many of my friends with MND have said, no, I'm not going to take it up. I was speaking to a woman today who she's had MND for 10 years. And I said, oh, what's your opinion on VAD? And I said, will you go it? She said, yeah, I'll go it because PowerCare have sacked me because I'm still alive.
Oh dear, that's unfortunate. So she's failed her MND.
Yeah, she makes me laugh so much, but palliative care did sack her. I think also palliative care has a branding issue. The words. I know I chair a group of about 100 people, and when I asked them, how many of you called in PowerCare once you were diagnosed with MND, no one put their hand up. Now, when my husband was diagnosed, I called PowerCare the next day, so they were on the journey with us the whole time. So as Andrew and both Jane have said, palliative care is not about the end day. Palliative care is about making your life better whilst you're still alive.
Yep.
And that's what this entire conversation is about too, is that how can you make each day better? And it's extremely important. Now, Emma mentioned in the podcast that we did last week in that there's still some tweaking that she would like done with the Victorian VAD legislation. Would you like to discuss, either of you?
Well, I'll kick off with one, and then Jane, you can leap in with another because there's more than one. So in Victoria in particular, but also South Australia, Victoria's law was the first state law in Australia, 2017, after a really fierce parliamentary battle. It only passed by 4 votes, and of necessity in that environment, with a lot of misinformation and fear mongering. The law was written very conservatively to get the necessary numbers. And amongst the prohibitions in that law is one that exists nowhere else in any other part of medicine in Australia, and that is that your doctor cannot raise the subject of assisted dying with you. They have to wait for you to raise it, and which means sometimes going through this ridiculous charade of, are you sure? Is there anything else you want to talk about? And of course, many people don't know about it. They may be from a socioeconomic background, or
It's not their first language.
it may not be their first language, or they may just be unaware because it's still not widely known. A recent survey in Queensland showed only 30% of people really knew about it. So it's a completely ridiculous and unfair prohibition. And that's probably the lowest hanging fruit of a number of things which legally stand in the way of people's choice. Jane, over to you.
Well, I'm going to pick a federal one, if that's all right. And one thing that has we found so discriminatory and just so incredibly unfair is the Federal Criminal Code. And this was an amendment to the Federal Criminal Code made in 2005, which prevents anyone inciting or counselling suicide over a phone or a telehealth consultation. Now, this was really, really shown how brutal it was when we had COVID, and every single branch of medicine, the doctor would be able to talk to the patient about, over the phone, over a telehealth consultation. People wanting access to VAD, and they're usually people either in such intense pain that they're bedridden and unable to go and see the doctor face to face, or live miles away and are simply unable to travel because of extreme pain. So not being able to even ring your doctor on a consultation and say, tell me about VAD, or even if you did meet your doctor for one face-to-face consultation, every time you want to talk to that doctor, it must be face-to-face. And this is something we really, really want to have repealed. I could go into more details, but I won't. But in essence, the doctor took this case. He wanted a judicial interpretation of the law, and the federal judge presiding over this case came out and said that they thought that voluntary assisted dying was suicide, and hence couldn't be discussed over a carriage service. So we've got into all that, voluntary assisted dying isn't suicide. There are so many reasons why there's a big difference, but it seems the federal government have really got their heels firmly in, and we've seen a few MPs introduce bills into parliaments, but at the moment it's just a no-go zone. Isn't it, Andrew?
Yes, and so we have, for example, the ridiculous situation in Queensland of doctors literally having to make 1,300-kilometre round trips to go and see someone face-to-face in rural areas, in all states, but particularly the big states of Western Australia and Queensland. These are very serious issues. And you can imagine, Jane, somebody in the advanced stages of motor neurone disease having to travel, say, 200 kilometres for a consultation.
I know someone who did. He had to go from Caulfield up to up near the border, because that's where he lived, and back again.
Right. I mean, absolutely crazy. Exacerbated by the fact that one of the biggest issues facing VAD in Australia is just getting enough doctors, and particularly specialists. In fact, you require, in the case of motor neurone disease or neurological diseases in Victoria, ultimately 3 specialists to agree not just that you meet the qualifications, but that you have 12 months or less to live. So it's a very difficult thing to do. And I interviewed the husband of a woman who died of MND, and she had, I think it was 16 specialists rejected her, and she lived in the middle of Melbourne, and it took her months to get approved. So when you add the carriage service prohibition to that, and what we explain to people, I understand why people go, oh, well, it's suicide. But I think that interpretation is either one of ignorance or says something about what's in your heart. And the way I explain it to people is, what's the difference between suicide and voluntary assisted dying? Well, we all remember September the 11th, 9/11. We all remember that terrible images of those people jumping off the burning buildings. We'll never forget them. What many people don't know, perhaps, is that the state medical examiner in New York deemed those deaths of the people who jumped not to be suicide, but to be homicide. Homicide caused by the event. They were faced with an impossible choice, burn to death or jump. So they chose the least worst choice. That's what voluntary assisted dying is. If you have to choose between the fire or the fall, what would you choose?
Yeah.
And we're going into an election year, so you may as well hit your head really hard against a brick wall, making any changes this year. That's
well, we'll continue trying. Change is not always easy, and you know, I think it's frustrating to us that we've had largely centre-left governments federally and in most states, and that pendulum is swinging as it does. And so we see the window for necessary changes are really closing.
And Jane, may I just interrupt? Another thing that has tended to be very problematic in Victoria is our legislation, as did WA, did not address conscientious institutional objection. So these places can just not provide information on VAD. They can prevent doctors going in doing assessments. We've heard of cases where the pharmacists are prevented from delivering the medication. Now, there's the new Aged Care Act is about to be implemented on July the 1st. And there is a little clause in that talks about equitable access for all people and equitable access to palliative care and all end-of-life processes as necessary, but VAD is not mentioned in that whole act. And I find that absolutely incredible. We're talking about people in aged care facilities who often aren't getting information from outside sources. They might find it difficult to access on the internet. And as soon as they perhaps mention, oh, what is this thing that I can die with, the staff just turn and walk out. And these people are left and they die these awful deaths because they haven't been informed about it and that no one has helped facilitate the process for them.
So are you talking about facilities that are owned by particular religious groups?
Well, it's basically faith-based, yes. I think there are a lot of places that wouldn't openly issue a public policy statement saying, we support VAD, because there still is that stigma, even among these aged care facilities as well.
Okay.
Do you agree, Andrew?
Yes, and it is a huge problem, and it makes me pretty hot under the collar, because it's often the places that work under the banner of the word mercy who show the least. And we're seeing some examples of faith-based institutions that have found a way to accommodate the legitimate moral objections of some members of their staff and their own credo and mission statement, to balance those with the needs of the people who they are treating. And let's not forget that all these faith-based institutions are significantly funded by taxpayers. If they're just funded by the Vatican, fair enough. But they're not. So there are some institutions that have found a way to do this, but there are others which are extremely hardline. And I remember, I will never forget this, in Western Australia, when we were fighting for that legislation to pass, there was a particularly impressive doctor who was an MND doctor. And in fact, the MND doctors in his health district went as one to advocate for the assisted dying law, even though some of them did not actually approve of the law. They didn't agree with it personally, and they went there as advocates for their patients. And he told me that we were talking about a particular faith-based facility not far from where he worked. He said, the number of times I've been called up there to give extra pain relief because they won't give it, the reason being that they were afraid of hastening somebody's death. And the expression he used, and I never forgot it, was, these bastards make you earn your death.
Oh, God, that's brilliant. I mean, sorry.
That still exists. That still exists. there are still, and this is where we get into questions directly of faith and medicine, there are still health professionals practicing in Australia today. And if you ever want to read a publication called Luke's Journal of Christian Dentistry and Medicine, you'll find people talking about this at some length who extol the virtues of suffering at the end of life. Not something they're seeking for people to have, but should it happen, then it is a tribute to Jesus' suffering on the cross, and therefore it has a spiritual value. Now, that's fine. I don't actually diminish that belief. But for those people to have the keys to the medicine cabinet and be able to decide how much suffering you have to endure is wrong on every level.
So if they wish to undergo that suffering personally, knock yourself out, mate, but do not visit that on another human being.
Well, I heard of a case of a man the other day with osteosarcoma and, in an awful amount of pain. And he asked his oncologist about VAD. And the doctor looked at him in the eyes and goes, "You're not a sissy. You don't need that." I mean, and that's not constitutional conscientious objection. That is outright obstruction.
Well, I call it conscientious obstruction.
That's what I was trying to think of. Yes, conscientious obstruction.
It's very wrong, and there are many examples of it. There's an oncologist in Victoria, and she wrote an article in the Australian with another medical professional, and the headline said so much. She was responding to the idea of autonomy as being central to the assisted dying philosophy. Autonomy, choice, call it what you will, but she was talking about autonomy, and the headline of the article was "Autonomy. It's not about you." I thought, wow, if your dying's not about you, who is it about?
Good sub-editing there. That's a beauty.
Well, she would have been thrilled with that headline.
She would have been totally thrilled with that. So, yeah, there are a couple of issues in that. Some MND clinics are based on Catholic land. And a lot of them, people who attend those clinics don't know that you have to ask for information about VAD in Victoria. So that's a word that I'm getting out a lot, and people are very surprised that they have to ask. They come away and I ask them, because I'm not shy, "How do you feel about VAD? You're going to sign up for VAD?" And they say, "How? How do I do that? How do I do that?" You have to ask.
I know it's a pity that we can't even have like brochures in a room. I mean, you go to a chemist and there's everything from pimples to hemorrhoids to goodness knows what, but there's not a little brochure on VAD. And that is the way you get to people and inform them. Even if the staff at a lot of these hospitals don't want to, impart the information themselves, at least have some brochures and numbers for people to reach out to the care navigators, or even to be able to ask their own doctor, "What is this VAD?" It's just so wrong when they're not provided with this critical information.
In states where it is permissible for doctors to raise this, it sensibly says that when they do, they must raise it in conjunction with other choices. Palliative care. What are your options? That's what you would expect an end of care conversation to be. Not you should have this or you should have this, but this is all the things you should consider. If you have more questions, I'll try and answer them, or I'll direct you to someone who can. And I'm sure I speak for Jane when I say I would be delighted if most people at the end of life equally explored voluntary assisted dying and palliative care. But for some people, either of those choices are unacceptable for their own personal reasons, and that's okay too.
And that's choice.
Yeah.
That's what we're all about. Robert was ill in Sydney. We used to live there. I used to live there. And so we had that conversation, Andrew, with our doctor, is that he told us about our options. And that was a confronting, but also that conversation was confronting, but it was also a relief that we knew that there were options.
I think it's a terrible, terrible thing. And I know, speaking with Jane about her mum, Elizabeth, when somebody dies badly, when a member of your family dies badly, it's very hard to shake a sense of, did I do enough? Did I make the right choices? Did I help enough? Did I ask the right questions? And certainly this is my experience with my father. none of us are experiencing death until we're suddenly in the middle of it. So we need the help of people that understand it and professionals to guide us and to help us do the right questions.
Yeah. You know, you can go. I remember listening to you talk about your dad once, and someone said, didn't you tell the medical staff that he was in pain? Well, of course you fucking told them he was in pain.
Yes,
But
we did.
wasn't the ability at that point to do more that they were doing. But that is still happening now in 2025. And that's why I get my knickers in a twist. Comment.
Well, furious agreement here, Jane.
Thank you. Jay too? Yeah. So I think it's about choice. It's about people understanding the choices that they have and being brave. And Andrew, what you said earlier about the families is so, we know what happens when someone dies and there's a fight over a will. You know, people that you never thought would come out and have a fight about a will. And that's happening before when someone says, I would like to end my life this way. Not all the time, but it does. And then I hear stories of the most beautiful, beautiful deaths. You know, I would love to have a death like some of the deaths that I've heard of because they're planned and they're organized and the families are supportive and it's loving. And that's an option that we should all have as well.
And like we've said right from the beginning, MND, there is no cure. There's not even that, as soon as you get that diagnosis, even the slightest glimmer of hope is just gone. And that's why by telling people at the time VAD is there, you can help relieve some of that awful stress and anxiety. I mean, Mum took only 9 months to die. And that was just every time you tried to help work out how to treat her best at the next stage, that had already arrived and you were on to the next. You're on a treadmill that you never got a chance to get off and just think, look what's happening. And that's what makes me sad. It was just such a busy time trying to do the right thing at the time, worrying about the type of death she was going to have. And I just think if she had voluntary assisted dying, I'm not saying Mum would have chosen it. Who knows? It would have been her choice entirely. But I do know for the whole family that would have provided a lot of comfort and just taken away some of that horrendous distress and angst we were all suffering from.
A very smart person who I worked with on the podcast, the first podcast series, said to me, she described assisted dying law as a permissive law, and she didn't mean it's permissive in that it's liberal and, you know, somehow wide open. She said it permits a conversation that previously was forbidden. And that's what Jane's really talking about. To have that conversation, whether or not that's the choice, whether or not it's even considered as a choice, it just opens up that conversation. And, you know, my brother-in-law died of cancer, and I watched what it was like for my sister and his daughter. And the metaphor I always had for it is the stone of sickness that sits inside a home, and it's immovable and it's huge, and you have to move your whole life around it. And being able to have that conversation and offer choices, you never remove the stone of sickness, but you can lift it a bit, and it can become less of a monolith in your life.
That's so true, because I mean, I can say that happened with Mum. Their beautiful home really went into a medicalised house. It was no longer a home, and you just watch this sort of insidious evasion of all these staff, medication, equipment, and Mum and Dad were had been so disempowered. And that's why, at least if it was a voluntary assisted dying, that would be something they'd feel were right at the end. They could look forward to knowing that they could make that final decision, and it wasn't totally dependent on all this machinery and other people in what was once their beautiful private home.
Andrew, one day my husband, we were in the hallway and there were stairs that went down, and he was still able to walk. And he said to me, would you please push me down the stairs? And I said, no, darling, because if you fell, you probably just break your neck and then we're more fucked. But that he got to that point is heartbreaking, and I'll never, ever forget that. But that happens daily in families because they don't know what to do.
And without question, the most powerful force that led to the legislation were the testimonies, particularly by the Victorian State Coroner, about the suicides of terminally and chronically ill people that were happening every week in Victoria and indeed around the country. They do still happen for different reasons, but many of those, the ones that, I mean, some of us knew some of these people and that were reported, wouldn't be happening now because those choices are available.
Yeah. And a lot of those people you're talking about were over 80, weren't they? I mean, I said that you get to your life, work hard, contribute to the community, and have to end your life that way. It's just criminal. Well, how about we end on a happy note? Oh, God.
You could buy the Go Gentle t-shirt, the merch, you know, what do
Okay.
we want this? When do we want it now? We think it's sell very well.
Okay.
It's Dying with Dignity Victoria t-shirt.
What was that, Jane?
So buy a Dying with Dignity Victoria t-shirt as well. You could wear them alternate days.
Actually, we don't have merch, but
well, I think you should. My kids, we used to live in near where you grew up, Andrew, and my kids, when the phone rang in the olden days, when the phone rang in the house, and the kids would say, North Shore Crematorium, you kill 'em, we grill 'em.
Yeah.
As we're drawing to a close.
Yes, Andrew. Please.
It's been great to have the conversation. I'd just like to emphasize to people that we all know that's where we're going. We're all going there in different ways. Yep. MND is the hardest way that I know of. But that not only legally, but within ourselves, we do have power. We have a certain amount of power over how the end of our lives are. And so it's worth, difficult though it is to look at, it's worth investing the time. And if your treating medical team or the institution you're at are being difficult or obstructive, go to your local Dying with Dignity state organisation and find someone that's going to help you, because that's what they're there for. You can come to Go Gentle and we can also direct you to people, but like Victoria had its 50th anniversary last year, Dying with Dignity. It's been a deep roots community organisation for half a century. And so even though you might feel disempowered, there are people that exist to help you and you can be helped.
Beautiful, thank you.
So
how can we help with the Victorian government making the changes there?
Well, at the moment, we're waiting for a 5-year report, which was on the first 4 years of the operation of the legislation. Now, it was purely on the operation of the law, and we're not expecting any legislative change at all, but we're waiting to get this report back, which was meant to be tabled last year in Parliament. And once we get that back, we're just going to have to go through some of those issues Andrew said and start, campaigning for change with those. And I think it's mainly just we tell our members and supporters to go and see your MP. And we've got a whole lot of new MPs now serving us from the time when we had the 2017 debate. And a lot of these MPs probably don't know a lot about voluntary assisted dying and also think, well, it was a fait accompli at the time. Isn't that fantastic? And don't really see the need for change. It's more or less you got the legislation, just be happy with what you've got. So I think, talking to your MP and, as Andrew said, telling stories are so powerful. And if you go and share that with your MP, they're the sort of things they do remember and reflect upon.
And in the case of Victoria, I would say there's actually a bit of an urgency because your state election is happening later this year. And I think it's, if the polling is to be believed, and why would it not be, there will be a change of government. And it may be for 8 years, 12 years before there's any necessarily changes to the legislation. We know from reports last year that there are still people in Victoria ending their lives in really brutal ways with terminal illnesses, because it's even accessing VAD is such a difficult process. It shouldn't be that difficult. And there are many sources of obstruction, some medical, some moral, some family, some societal, and some legal. So I would suggest for those, particularly within your community, who are concerned that the law may be too difficult for them, they should go and speak to their local MP and demand to know what is happening with that review, and why is Victoria behind the rest of Australia in terms of the ease of access to this choice.
And we also know the opposition, they might be out there hiding, but they sure as life there will come, running at us with full force. There are so many people out there just waiting for, there to be a slip up in the legislation or in the practice of VAD or something. So, yeah, there's a lot of work to do. But as Andrew said, just people have to go and talk to their MPs to find out and demand to find out what's happening.
Yeah, if you're one of those people that believes your autonomy is about you, then you should probably be interested in this.
That's a good one. We might use that as our next gift for you. Yes.
I'm getting a T-shirt with that on it. My autonomy is all about me. Yeah.
If I was an opponent, I'd have, there's no I in autonomy.
You're on fire, Denton. I can't express my gratitude to the two of you for what you do for all of us over an extremely long period of time, but it was worth it. Thank you. And
well,
thank
you
so much
for having
me today.
Well, thank you for having me, Jane. And I was going to say, anytime I've been anywhere and talked with Andrew, I find it soul destroying, so demoralising.
But Andrew is so shit. I mean, because he's soul destroying and demoralising, or?
Oh, when I talk after he's been talking, it's just the worst thing in the world. But no, that was really fun to engage in that talk today. Thanks, Jane, and thanks, Andrew.
Well, if it helps you feel better, Jane, too, that was really good. It was good. I like the goodness of it. It was good.
It was real good. It was a real good interview.
Actually, can I just say more seriously, Jane, I listened to a conversation with Emma Voolen, who I know a little bit, and I just think it's fantastic that, as you said, you talked about being a community. The expression I use is deeply human. I like the very deeply human way you talk to people facing something so hard and so all-encompassing and so all strength to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. It's going on my gravestone, Andrew.
Oh.
You know what's going on my gravestone?
I'm fucked. What?
No, discontinued line.
What's going on? Every time I say to my parents, how are you? Even if they're unwell, they go, I'm fine. So that's going on their gravestone. I'm fine.
Yeah. Now, speaking of going, I must.
Right, we're all going. I am extremely grateful and thank you. That's all I can say.
Great to talk to you.
Thanks, Andrew. Thank you very much, Jane.
Good to see you again, Jane.
Bye. Jane, too. Thank you, Andrew. 1.
Jane 7. Yep.
Oh, Jane 7. Okay.
Bye.